Hello, RockingMrE. Now, I want to tell you, I don't know really much about your channel. Let me just tell you how much I know. So, I happen to subscribe to a commenter today. I tend to click on a commenter when I recognize their name, and this person I long since recognized. But I went into their channel and I saw a video in reply to a video of yours, or about one of yours. And it characterized you as an objectivist railing against postmodernism and against Marxism and against feminism and an Irandian objectivist. So I checked out a video of yours. I'll put a link. I think I found the one that it was postmodernist nonsense. And I watched another video of yours. I couldn't say which one at the moment. I'm going to watch more. Now, some of the characterization definitely seems to be the case. I didn't see you say you were an objectivist, but I did see you, a Randian objectivist, but I did see you say you were objective and you believed in objectivism. And I think you characterize postmodernism in a way convenient to you. Kind of, you can scoop a lot of things you don't like up under it. Now, so what I want to talk to you about is postmodernism. Now, I think that there isn't any one school of philosophy that is the postmodern philosophy. Postmodern has to do with being after a certain point of time, after the collapse of a certain way of thinking that dominated what we call the modern era. Right? So this modern era is associated with a period of scientific enlightenment, really. And it's sort of a somewhat liberal era in contrast to the rule of kings that had ruled for eons before that. And old dogmas, religious dogmas, political dogmas, this many dogmas were being broken down by the science of Newton and everyone. Right? So the dogma of the day was falling down, but because it was this kind of science where we were all part of a very well ordered machine, what wasn't being lost was order. So that was, notable because the religious and dogmatic, advocates have entirely, sold the world on that to have order, you need to believe the old ways. There is no way for things to be unless the way they've always been. You'd rob them of their one way of being. And that was being shown to be bullshit, and yet the new Newtonian idea of the universe was also ordered, very well ordered. Right? And that's the modern era. It's a transformation to this other well ordered idea, this more scientifically well ordered idea. Right? But then that fell apart. That science didn't stand up. About 100 years ago now, it started to fall apart. And now what we call postmodern philosophies and areas of study, humanities, whatever, all the weird things people want to call postmodern, are just all the different reactions to this. And many of them, of course, are idiotic and misguided and are still trying to apply principles from the classical model. Like there's some truths they've gotten, but they haven't realized the old classical things that don't pertain anymore. Like, okay, there's no ultimate meaning to life, no one ultimate meaning to life, there's no purpose, things don't have a built-in purpose, and this confuses them because they think, well, there ought to be one purpose to things, so there's no purpose at all. It's like, well, no, there's 1,000 purposes. You can put something to a purpose. Okay, so the postmodern philosophies are all different kinds. Now, they tend to be relativistic because they have to be relativistic because the objective model is the idea, and it's very clear and technically defined. And and this is the idea of object that we're using. You know, you have a thing and it's got inherent properties. It is red. You know, it is warm. It is all, you know, it is soft. It is has these properties inherent to it. But we know that a car is red not because of an inherent property of redness, but because it's reflecting red light. Now, you can change it to say, well, it has an objective property of reflecting red light. No, it doesn't, because it reflects all kinds of light, and depending with general relativity, velocities, you know, light, it doesn't have just one color even. Okay, and what it really is a system, and these things we call properties emerge from interactions in systems. Everything breaks down into a system, and objects aren't systems. They're things with properties. It turns out a thing with a property is just an approximation, a very useful, and I use it too, approximation to talk about a system in a certain somewhat stable state. Right? So it's a way to talk about the system. It's still a system there. So there's a kind of after modern, you know, classical period physics is over, and in what we call, you know, modern physics, ironically, but of the standard model, there are many other philosophies and, you know, theories of science that accommodate this shift. The fact that, you know, everything's energy. These facts, without being idealism, without being immaterial, I believe in materialism. But how am I like what you would think of these idealists? Well, what if life is a dream? It could be. I admit, of course. We don't know. We're all getting these perceptions. We get perceptions during dreams, whatever. It could be some kind of a dream where, you know, your foot can be crushed by a rock. Pretty much different from a dream at night, if somebody wants to call it a dream. As far as I know, it's just a metaphor. It wouldn't matter. Why? Because that's what materialism is really about. It's not invested that there's objects. It could be energies and systems, and whether properties adhere to objects or properties adhere to relationships. Those can all be open questions, right? And I can still tell when a fact matters. When you say these issues about, well, step in front of a bus, it doesn't make it objective just because it matters and there is a consequence. You know, a real relativism like you find in physics or even in, you know, pre-Socratic, or for that matter, just Greek philosophy, they don't say just anything goes. Just because a fact is relative doesn't mean that you get to make it up with the power of your mind. How would that come from relativity? You know, it doesn't. Relativity is about relationships, and it's about the fact that concrete statements that we make, in other words, factual statements, are always about relationships, and we can demonstrate this in every case that you care to bring up. And I wonder if you can deal with this kind of view of postmodernism. So that first of all, you can't pretend there's some unified postmodern philosophy. The point is, we had the classical model, the Newtonian model of physics. It broke down. We had to replace it with the standard model, which isn't even really a single model because it has quantum mechanics and relativity in it. And those two are like, you know, whatever, Venus and Mars, right? They don't even bother to contradict each other. They just like say different things, and both are true. And it's like, how do they overlap, and why don't they overlap more? They must be overlapping, and all of these questions are left open. And we realize that our most accurate scientific theories ever need to be improved, especially as theories. They're already so predictively good that that's like good enough. But as a theory, they need unification. For example, a lot of people feel. So we know that we have to keep working on them. And we talk about a law of physics can't be broken. You're just presuming that what is out there in the patterns of physics should be called a law. Everything really called a law, like Newton's laws, it's not that they can be broken, it's that they are broken. It's not the whole story. We know that. Relativity adds terms that aren't taken into account by Newton. And it's that way in relativity, probably, right? And there's either other terms or really the whole foundation needs to be changed so we can see something that's unified with quantum mechanics. And one thing we know is that when you pursue the material world, and if that's what you mean by objective, like there is a real world, is what you mean by objective, not that there's classical objects in it, then one thing we know is that there aren't classical objects because the world does not consist of things with inherent properties. It consists of systems, right? And elements seem literally defined in terms of their relationships, and it makes sense if you think of the universe as field and field theory because there's a continuity and there is a connection in distance that ensures that you don't have things, right? The edges are always blurry, you know? Like you can't ever really separate a wave from the surrounding water. It just sort of melds in, and that's what everything is waves and fields. So it makes plenty sense. And you could think whatever you want, I'm not any of those things, objectivist and anti-feminist and anti-Marxist. You could think whatever you want. But to isolate this one issue, I don't think you can use this as a scapegoat. You can't pretend this is a one defined thing, this postmodernism. In fact, what there is a wreckage of previous philosophies, and if you want to hold on to one of those, good luck. And there are dozens and hundreds and unlimited numbers of candidates for handling the new information. If you stick with the classical model, though, well, it's pretty much assured not to handle the new information. I mean, that's why we need new models. So, I'm interested in how you characterize postmodernism, but I don't really understand enough about exactly what you're into to know if you're going to want to, what your attitude is about this particular type of commentary on this particular narrow issue. But you do seem to put a lot of stock in this idea of postmodernism, and regardless of the inevitability of us not agreeing on details, I wonder how much of your view is flexible. Because, for example, your comments to me in your video were interesting in that they didn't go into totally typical direction. I mean, you narrowed in on, well, but that's no reason to be an idealist, which is great because I could say, well, I'm not an idealist. I agree. Let's talk about this from the point of view of somebody says that old classical thinking about objects and predicate logic as inherent in nature just isn't going to work when you're dealing with relativity and quantum mechanics. We obviously need something new. Yes, I have ideas, and none of it's going to be that you can dream that you have wings and are you doing fly. That's not going to be a discussion with me because I don't believe that or anything remotely like that. And that's not even what relativity really means at all, because you have a modern example or a postmodern example with general relativity, but you also have an ancient example with ancient skeptics who did not take relativity to mean that you could think whatever you wanted. It meant you had to judge from your point of view. And that, of course, you do. You have your senses. And that's also what's meant by it being subjective, because subjective facts can matter. So you can get materialism off subjective facts, which is obvious because we know we just get information from our senses. Or do you believe there's some insight that gets around the senses? And that's what subjective means, is that you're the subject of these sense information, and that's how you build objective information. as a special subset that you've information processed of subjective information that you've checked and double checked so that, okay, this information counts as objective because I've double checked it, I've triple checked it, I've triangulated on it. And then after that, yes, there's checking with other people and seeing what they found out. Um, so, yeah. Cheers.